They called him the boy from under the bridge. But who was he really? A runaway? A thief? A child abandoned by his own family? No one knew for sure. No one bothered to ask. Yet every single morning, as the city yawned awake and the world rushed into motion, there he was, emerging from the shadows with a battered backpack clutched tightly against his chest. His name was Ethan. By day, he was a student. By night, a ghost among the forgotten. And here's the mystery. Here's the question that kept even his teachers awake at night. How did a boy with no home, no food, and no family manage to show up at school every single day? And why? Despite the hunger, despite the ridicule, despite the endless battles life threw his way, did Ethan believe so fiercely that education was his only chance to survive? This is not a story of pity. This is a story of resilience, of a secret promise, of a child who refused to break, even when the world tried to crush him. And what happened to Ethan years later will shock you. But before we get there, you need to know how it all began. The bridge was a world of its own, a hidden world the city above pretended not to see. By day, cars thundered overhead, their tires screeching, horns blaring. By night, the underbelly of that bridge came alive with shadows. Men gathered around flickering fires, smoke drifted into the damp air. Whispers turned into arguments, footsteps scurried in the dark. Ethan had carved out a corner for himself, just wide enough for a thin blanket and his backpack. That bag was his treasure chest. Inside it were 2 pencils worn down to their stubs, a notebook with more torn pages than clean ones, and a photograph of a woman with kind eyes and a smile that felt like sunlight. His mother. Every night, he pressed that photo against his chest. Every night, he whispered, "I'll keep my promise." Because long before he became the boy from under the bridge, Ethan had been a son, a dreamer, a child with a future. Till life stripped it all away, piece by piece. The memory haunted him. The night everything changed. He could still hear the ragged sound of his mother's breathing, still see the way her hand trembled as she reached for his cheek. Her eyes, clouded with pain, were still soft when they looked at him. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice breaking, "life will not be kind. But promise me you'll never stop learning. Promise me you'll fight for your future, even if the world takes everything else away." Tears blurred his vision, but he clutched her hand tightly. "I promise, Mom," he said. His voice cracked, but his heart was firm. "I'll never stop." It was the last promise he ever made to her. Hours later, she was gone. And from that night on, every step he took to school, every note he scribbled, every book he clung to, it was all for her. For the promise. For the chance that maybe, just maybe, the bridge would not define him. Hunger was Ethan's most faithful companion. It gnawed at him in the mornings. It followed him into class. It stalked him through every lesson, every break, every walk back to the bridge. There were days he couldn't remember the taste of real food. Only the burn of water gulped too quickly. Only the ache of an empty stomach twisting in protest. But if you saw him sitting in the front row, back straight, eyes locked on the blackboard, you would never guess the storm inside him. Because Ethan had mastered a skill most adults never learned: how to hide pain. The cruelest part of every school day was lunch. The bell would ring. Children would cheer. Trays clattered against tables. The air filled with the smell of food, fresh bread, steaming rice, bowls of hot soup. The cafeteria was a chorus of laughter and chewing. And there, at the corner of the room, sat Ethan. No tray, no lunchbox, no food. Just his notebook open, his pencil moving furiously across the page, as if solving equations could quiet the growl in his stomach. Sometimes he'd lift his head and glance around, at the bread crusts left behind, at the laughter of children who had never gone a day without a meal. Then, almost as quickly, he would lower his eyes again. He refused to let hunger show. But what he didn't know was that someone else had been watching. Mr. Carter had been teaching for nearly 20 years. He had seen bright students, lazy students, troublemakers, and dreamers. But Ethan was different. There was a fire in his eyes, a desperation that couldn't be faked. The boy's answers were sharp, his notes meticulous. Yet his clothes were always the same. His shoes, worn to shreds. His hands, trembling slightly as if from exhaustion. And at lunch, while the others ate, Ethan always sat alone. Always scribbling. Always pretending. At first, Mr. Carter dismissed it as simple poverty. Sad, yes, but not unusual. Until the day he followed him. Until the day the truth beneath the bridge shattered every assumption. Now, the knowledge burned in him like a secret too heavy to carry. He couldn't stop thinking about it. The image of Ethan curling under the concrete, hugging that backpack as if it held his entire life, falling asleep to the roar of traffic instead of a lullaby. Mr. Carter knew he had to do something. But how? Would Ethan even accept help? Or would pride, fear, and mistrust push him away? The decision came sooner than expected. It was a Thursday. Gray clouds gathered over the city, the air thick with the promise of rain. Inside the classroom, the lights flickered, thunder rolled in the distance, and students fidgeted restlessly. But Ethan sat still, focused, steady, his pencil racing across the page. When the final bell rang, the storm broke. Rain crashed against windows. Wind howled through the streets. Children ran, laughing and shrieking, clutching their jackets as they splashed through puddles. Ethan walked calmly, as if storms were nothing new to him. But Mr. Carter watched from the doorway, his chest tightening. He knew exactly where the boy was headed. A bridge offered no shelter from rain, no warmth from the wind. Tonight would be brutal. And so, heart pounding, Mr. Carter made his choice. He grabbed his coat, stepped into the storm, and followed. By the time Ethan reached the bridge, he was soaked through. His shirt clung to his skin, his shoes squelched with every step. He ducked under the concrete, dropped his backpack, and shook out his blanket. Thin, useless against the cold. He sat down, curling into himself, trying to pretend the water dripping from the cracks above wasn't falling directly on his shoulder. Then he froze. Footsteps. Approaching slowly, carefully. His heart pounded. Instinct screamed danger. He clutched his backpack tighter, eyes darting into the shadows. And then a voice. Ethan. The boy's blood ran cold. He knew that voice. Mr. Carter. His teacher. For a long moment, Ethan didn't move. Didn't breathe. He wanted to vanish into the concrete, to pretend he wasn't there. But it was useless. Mr. Carter had already seen him. The teacher stepped closer, his face pale with shock, his umbrella dripping water onto the ground. Ethan, this is where you live. Ethan's throat tightened. He wanted to deny it, to lie, to push the man away. But the blanket, the backpack, the photograph, all of it betrayed him. He looked down, ashamed, silent. Mr. Carter's voice broke. My God, all this time. He crouched, lowering himself to Ethan's level. Why didn't you tell me? The boy shook his head violently. I don't need help, he muttered. His voice was small, but fierce. I can take care of myself. Ethan, Mr. Carter said gently. No one should have to take care of themselves like this. Not at your age. But Ethan only clutched his backpack tighter. His mother's words echoed in his head. Never stop learning. Fight for your future. If he accepted pity, if he relied on someone else, would that mean breaking the promise? The rain poured endlessly, soaking through the cracks in the bridge. Ethan shivered beneath his blanket, teeth chattering, body trembling from cold. He closed his eyes, whispering his mother's words again, clinging to them like a lifeline. But this time, something felt different. Someone knew his secret now. Someone had seen him, not as a shadow, not as a nameless child from under a bridge, but as Ethan. And though fear gnawed at him, fear of losing control, fear of being exposed, deep inside, a spark of hope flickered. For the first time in years, Ethan wondered, maybe I'm not as alone as I thought. Every morning, before the sun had fully risen, Ethan began the long walk. To his classmates, it was invisible, an unseen ritual, a journey they never thought about. For them, school was just a bus ride, a short stroll, a comfortable routine. But for Ethan, school began long before the first bell rang. The streets at dawn were different, quieter, but not silent. Street sweepers dragged their brooms across sidewalks. Vendors began lifting heavy crates onto stalls. Stray dogs trotted between alleys in search of scraps. And then, there was Ethan. His shoes slapped against wet pavement. His thin jacket barely kept the chill away. His backpack bounced lightly with every step, not heavy with books, but with the few precious belongings he owned. The walk stretched on for miles, past the market stalls that smelled of fish and fruit, past the coffee shops glowing with warm yellow light, past apartment windows where children still slept under thick blankets. Each step carried him closer to the world he longed to belong to, and further away from the one he couldn't escape. Ethan's routine was exact. It had to be. If he left too late, he'd arrive sweaty, disheveled, and late. If he left too early, he'd reach school before the doors opened, standing awkwardly outside where other kids might see. He timed his steps by the city itself. When the baker flipped his open sign, he was on schedule. When the first bus rumbled past the corner, he was still good. But if the sun was already peeking over the rooftops by the time he reached the third intersection, he knew he had to run. And run he often did. The worst part wasn't the distance, it was the shoes. The soles had split months ago. Every step let in gravel, dirt, and sometimes water. He had tried stuffing cardboard inside to make them last, but the rain ruined that trick. His feet were blistered, raw in places, but he didn't complain. He couldn't. Complaints were luxuries for people who had options. Ethan had only one: keep walking. Every blister, every ache, every step was a test of will. And each day he passed. The long walk was more than a journey. It was a battlefield of memories. Sometimes, when exhaustion blurred his vision, Ethan saw flashes of the life he once had. His mother walking beside him, holding his hand. Their tiny apartment with its peeling wallpaper but warm laughter. The smell of her cooking. Cheap meals, but cooked with love. Those memories hurt, but they also pushed him forward. He whispered to himself, "I promised her." And step by step, he kept that promise alive. What Ethan didn't realize was that people did notice him. The old man sweeping outside the bakery saw him pass every morning, thin, determined, always alone. The woman at the bus stop noticed the boy with the broken shoes. Even the stray dogs seemed to know his scent, following him for a block before wandering away. But the most watchful eyes belonged to Mr. Carter. Ever since that stormy night under the bridge, the teacher had been unable to stop thinking about Ethan's walk. Sometimes, from his car parked down the street, he caught sight of the boy trudging through the dawn. He never approached. He didn't want to spook him. But he watched, and he worried. How long could Ethan survive like this? One morning, the walk nearly broke him. Rain had fallen the night before, and the streets were slick. Ethan's shoes, already flimsy, slipped on the pavement. His stomach growled with a hunger so sharp it made him dizzy. He knew he couldn't be late, but his legs felt like lead. So he did something dangerous. He took a shortcut. It was an alley he had always avoided. Dark, narrow, littered with trash. The kind of place where the wrong kind of people lingered. But desperation clouded his judgment. He slipped into the shadows, heart racing. Halfway through, he realized his mistake. A group of older boys blocked the exit. Rough voices, sharp eyes, the kind of kids who lived off trouble. One of them grinned, stepping forward. "Well, look what we got here," the boy sneered. "Were you running off to, huh? School?" Ethan froze. He wanted to run, but they had already surrounded him. Another boy snatched at his backpack. Ethan clutched it tight, panic flooding him. That bag wasn't just his belongings. It was his mother's photo, his promise, his life. "Let it go," one of them barked. "No." Ethan's voice cracked, but it was fierce. "It's mine." The alley filled with laughter. "Tough little rat, aren't you?" One of the boys shoved him. Ethan stumbled, but didn't fall. Rage burned through his fear. He couldn't lose the backpack. He wouldn't. So, with all the strength he had, he shoved back. For a moment, silence. The bigger boy stared at him, stunned. Then, with a snarl, he raised his fist. And that's when a voice thundered from the street. "Hey, leave him alone." The gang scattered, cursing as they vanished into the shadows. Ethan's heart pounded as he turned. Standing at the mouth of the alley, umbrella in hand, was Mr. Carter. His face pale, his eyes blazing with fury. "Mr. Carter rushed forward, grabbing Ethan by the shoulders. "Are you hurt?" Ethan shook his head, though his knees trembled. His grip on the backpack was iron tight. "What were you thinking, coming through here?" the teacher demanded. His voice was sharp, but beneath it lay fear. "Do you know what could have happened?" I was late," Ethan stammered. "I didn't want to miss school." The words hit Mr. Carter like a blow. This boy risked his life, his safety, for the chance to sit in a classroom. For a moment, the teacher couldn't speak. Finally, he sighed, his anger melting into sorrow. "Ethan, no lesson, no grade, is worth your life." But Ethan shook his head fiercely. "It is. It's all I have." The teacher looked at him then, not as a student, but as a soldier fighting a war no child should ever face. And deep inside, he made another vow. Whatever it took, he would protect this boy, even if Ethan didn't want saving. By the time they reached school, Ethan's clothes were damp, his hands scraped, his heart still racing. He sat at his desk, clutching his pencil as if nothing had happened. To the other students, it was just another day. But for Ethan, and for Mr. Carter, everything had changed. Because the long walk wasn't just about distance anymore. It was about danger, sacrifice, survival. And now, Ethan's secret was no longer his alone. Someone else knew. Someone else cared. For the first time, the boy from under the bridge wasn't walking entirely in the dark. There comes a moment in every battle when the body whispers what the mind refuses to hear. A moment when determination alone is no longer enough. When even promises cannot hold back the weight of exhaustion. For Ethan, that moment arrived on an ordinary Tuesday. The morning walk had been harder than usual. His feet dragged against the pavement. His backpack felt heavier than ever. Every step sent a dull ache through his legs. He hadn't eaten since Saturday, a stale roll of bread he'd found discarded behind a bakery. For 3 days, his stomach had been nothing but fire and emptiness. But still he walked. Still he showed up. Still, he sat in the front row with his pencil poised, as though his life depended on it. And in truth, it did. The day began like any other. The chatter of students, the scrape of chairs, the echo of chalk against the blackboard. Ethan sat straight-backed, eyes locked on Mr. Carter's lesson. But inside, his body screamed. His vision blurred. The letters on the board swam together. His hand trembled around the pencil. He tried to will it away, tried to convince himself he was fine. He couldn't fail now. Not when he had come this far. Not when his mother's voice still echoed in his mind. Never stop learning. Fight for your future. But the fight was slipping beyond his grasp. From the front of the classroom, Mr. Carter noticed it. Ethan's eyes weren't shining with their usual sharpness. His pencil faltered mid-sentence. Sweat beaded on his brow, though the room was cool. Mr. Carter's chest tightened. He knew the signs too well. He had seen hunger before. Not the casual hunger of a skipped meal, but the dangerous kind. The kind that hollowed faces and stole strength. He wanted to stop the lesson, to march Ethan to the nurse's office, to demand answers. But he hesitated. The boy's pride was unbreakable. One wrong move could humiliate him in front of everyone. So Mr. Carter watched, waiting for the right moment. He didn't realize that the breaking point was only minutes away. It happened without warning. One moment, Ethan was staring at the board. The next, his pencil slipped from his fingers. His vision went black at the edges. He swayed in his chair, once, twice, before his body gave way. The sound of his fall silenced the room. Chairs screeched back. Gasps filled the air. Ethan, Mr. Carter's voice boomed as he rushed forward, dropping his chalk, kneeling beside the boy sprawled on the floor. Ethan's face was pale, his lips cracked, his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. The classroom buzzed with whispers. Is he okay? What happened? Did he faint? Mr. Carter didn't wait for answers. He scooped Ethan up, light as a feather in his arms, and carried him out the door. The school nurse looked up in shock as Mr. Carter burst through the door. He collapsed, the teacher said urgently. He hasn't eaten, I don't know for how long. They laid Ethan on the cot. The nurse checked his pulse, his breathing, his pupils. Then she opened a drawer and pulled out a pack of crackers, a small carton of milk. When the food touched his lips, Ethan stirred weakly. His hands, trembling, clutched at the crackers as if they might vanish. He ate slowly at first, then hungrily, almost desperately. Mr. Carter turned away, throat tight. He had known the boy was struggling, but this was worse than he imagined. Hours later, Ethan opened his eyes. The room was quiet. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, striping the walls in pale gold. His stomach no longer burned, though it still ached with emptiness. And there, sitting beside the cot, was Mr. Carter. For a long time, neither spoke. Then the teacher leaned forward, voice low but firm. Ethan, this can't go on. The boy looked away, shame flooding his face. I'm fine, he whispered. No, Mr. Carter said sharply. You're not fine. You're starving. You're walking miles every day in broken shoes. You're sleeping under a bridge. And now, you nearly collapsed in front of the whole class. Ethan flinched, but the words were true. He had no strength to deny them. Silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Finally, Ethan whispered, "I don't need anyone's pity." "It's not pity," Mr. Carter replied. His voice softened. "It's care. And whether you want it or not, you deserve it." Ethan's hands tightened around his backpack. Inside, the photograph of his mother pressed against the fabric, as if reminding him of his promise. He wanted to tell Mr. Carter everything. The nights of cold, the hunger, the fear. But the words stuck in his throat. To speak them aloud would make them too real. So he stayed silent. That night, Mr. Carter couldn't sleep. He sat at his kitchen table, papers spread before him, but his mind was elsewhere. What was the right thing to do? Should he call social services? Risk Ethan being taken away, swallowed by the system? Or should he find another way? Quieter, gentler, one that wouldn't shatter the boy's fragile pride. Every option felt like walking a tightrope. One wrong move, and Ethan might slip away forever. But one thing was certain. He couldn't stand by anymore. The breaking point had come. And now, something had to change. Back under the bridge, Ethan lay awake, staring at the concrete ceiling. His body ached from weakness. His mind replayed the moment of collapse over and over. The gasps of his classmates. Mr. Carter's arms carrying him through the hall. Shame burned in him. He hated being seen as weak. He hated being exposed. But beneath the shame, another feeling stirred. Hope. Because for the first time, someone had caught him when he fell. Someone hadn't turned away. Maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to fight this battle entirely alone. The days after Ethan's collapse carried a heavy silence. Whispers followed him down the hallways. Classmates stared when they thought he wasn't looking. Some with pity, some with curiosity, a few with cruel amusement. But Ethan kept his head down, as if nothing had happened. He scribbled notes furiously, answered questions sharply, pretended he didn't feel the stares. Still, the truth lingered in the air like smoke. Everyone had seen it. Ethan wasn't invincible. He was breakable. And no one knew that better than Mr. Carter. Each night, Mr. Carter wrestled with the same thoughts. He had carried secrets before, confessions from students, struggles from parents, but never one this heavy. A boy living under a bridge. Starving. Fading before his eyes. He couldn't ignore it any longer. But how to help without pushing Ethan away? The boy's pride was a fortress. One wrong step, and the walls would slam shut forever. So Mr. Carter made a plan. Careful, patient, but bold. It began with little things. A sandwich left on Ethan's desk at lunchtime. The cafeteria had extras, Mr. Carter would say casually. A pair of shoes slipped into his locker. The school had donations, he explained. An extra set of notebooks and pencils. Spare supplies. Each gesture was disguised as coincidence, as charity meant for many, not just Ethan. At first, the boy resisted. He tried to refuse the food, tried to hand back the shoes. But his hunger betrayed him. His blistered feet sighed in relief. Slowly, cautiously, he accepted. One rainy afternoon, as the last students filed out, Mr. Carter asked Ethan to stay behind. The boy stiffened, suspicion flashing in his eyes. He hated being singled out. But he nodded, dropping into the chair at the front row, backpack clutched against his chest. Mr. Carter sat across from him, hands folded. For a long moment, he simply studied the boy's tired face, the stubborn set of his jaw. Then he spoke. "Ethan, I want to make you an offer." The boy's eyes narrowed. "What kind of offer?" "I have a spare room," Mr. Carter said carefully. "It's nothing fancy. Just a bed, a desk, a roof. You'd have meals, a place to study, a place to sleep. No more bridges. No more hunger." The words hung in the air like thunder. Ethan's chest tightened. His grip on the backpack turned white-knuckled. Live in his teacher's house? Eat at his table? Depend on him? The thought was unbearable, and yet tempting. "I don't need your charity," Ethan muttered. "It's not charity," Mr. Carter said softly. "It's a chance. A chance to focus on school without worrying about where you'll sleep or what you'll eat." But Ethan shook his head. People don't give things for free. Not without wanting something back. The bitterness in his voice cut deep. The room was silent except for the patter of rain against the windows. Finally, Ethan whispered, "If I accept, it means I couldn't keep my promise." Mr. Carter frowned. "What promise?" Ethan hesitated. His throat burned. But the words spilled anyway. "To my mom," he said hoarsely. "She told me to fight. To never stop learning. To make it on my own. If I take your help, doesn't that mean I failed her?" Mr. Carter's heart cracked. He leaned forward, voice trembling with emotion. No, Ethan. It means you're keeping her promise. Fighting doesn't mean fighting alone. It means surviving. It means making choices that give you a future. That's what she wanted for you. Not hunger. Not suffering. A future. Ethan stared at him, torn in two. One part of him screamed to refuse. To walk out. To prove he didn't need anyone. To protect the thin armor of pride that had kept him alive all these years. But another part, the part that longed for warmth, for safety, for one night, without shivering under a bridge, whispered yes. The war raged inside him as rain drummed harder against the glass. Finally, his voice broke through the silence. I need time. That night, Ethan lay awake under the bridge. His blanket was damp, his stomach empty. Mr. Carter's words echoed in his head. Fighting doesn't mean fighting alone. He stared at the photograph of his mother, her smile frozen in time. What do I do, Mom? He whispered. Would you be proud or ashamed? Tears slipped down his cheeks, unseen in the dark. By morning, the decision still wasn't clear. But as Ethan began the long walk, shoes squelching in puddles, hunger twisting in his stomach, something inside him broke. He couldn't keep going like this. Not forever. Not and survive. And maybe, just maybe, accepting help wasn't weakness. Maybe it was the bravest fight of all. The morning Ethan finally said yes felt strange, heavier, almost unreal. He had rehearsed the words 100 times in his head, but when he stood before Mr. Carter after class, backpack clutched tight, heart pounding, the words still scraped painfully from his throat. I'll take your offer, he whispered. Mr. Carter's eyes softened, relief flooding his face. But he didn't smile, not yet. He simply nodded, as if afraid too much joy might scare the boy away. All right, he said gently. Come with me after school. The walk to Mr. Carter's house felt longer than all the miles Ethan had ever walked to school. Every step was heavy with doubt. What if it was a mistake? What if he didn't belong? What if kindness had a hidden cost? When they arrived, the sight of the house stunned him. It wasn't large, but to Ethan it looked enormous. Walls that weren't cracked, windows that glowed warm, a door that promised safety. Mr. Carter unlocked it, pushed it open, and said softly, "Welcome home." The words nearly broke him. Home, a word Ethan hadn't heard in years. Mr. Carter led him down a short hallway to a small room. Inside, a narrow bed, a wooden desk, a lamp, and a dresser. Nothing extraordinary, yet to Ethan, it was a palace. He stood frozen in the doorway, unable to move. The smell of clean sheets, the sight of a pillow, the thought of sleeping without concrete beneath him, it overwhelmed him. That evening, Mr. Carter made dinner, simple pasta, bread, and vegetables. To Ethan, it was a feast. He sat stiffly at the table, unsure of the rules. He wanted to devour the food, to eat until his stomach stopped aching, but he forced himself to take small bites, chewing slowly, pretending he wasn't starving. Mr. Carter noticed. He didn't comment, didn't push. Instead, he kept the conversation light. Asked about Ethan's favorite subjects. Mentioned a book he thought Ethan might like. Bit by bit, the boy relaxed. The food filled him, warmth spreading through his chest. For the first time in years, he felt not just full, but human. When the lights went out, Ethan lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The sheets smelled of laundry soap. The blanket was warm. The pillow cradled his head. But sleep didn't come easily. His mind raced. What if he woke up tomorrow and it was gone? What if this was just a dream? He clutched his backpack to his chest, as he always had under the bridge. Inside, his mother's photo was safe. He whispered to it softly, "I kept my promise, Mom. I'm still fighting." At last, his eyes closed, and for the first time in years, he slept without fear. The next morning felt strange. No walk through the cold. No icy water from the fountain. No hunger twisting in his stomach. Instead, he woke to the smell of coffee, the sound of birds outside the window. Mr. Carter had left toast and fruit on the table. A note beside it read, "Have a good day, Ethan. Don't forget your math homework." Ethan stared at it for a long time. A note. A simple kindness. Tears threatened, but he blinked them away. He ate slowly, carefully, savoring every bite. But as the days passed, Ethan discovered that safety came with its own struggles. At school, whispers grew louder. "Did you hear? He's living with Mr. Carter now." "Why him? Why not me?" Creepy, if you ask me. Ethan burned with shame. He wanted to shout the truth, that this wasn't charity, that he had fought for every step. But instead, he kept silent, jaw tight, fists clenched. At home, the silence sometimes weighed heavy. Mr. Carter was kind, but he wasn't Ethan's mother. The house didn't feel fully his. He didn't know how long he could stay. Every kindness felt like a debt he couldn't repay. One night, after a particularly hard day at school filled with cruel whispers, Ethan snapped. He slammed his backpack onto the floor, glaring at the desk Mr. Carter had given him. "I don't belong here," he shouted. Mr. Carter, startled, asked gently, "What happened?" "I'm not your son. I'm not your charity case." Ethan's voice cracked, rage and grief spilling out. "I can't pay you back for any of this." The silence afterward was crushing. Then Mr. Carter spoke, steady but firm. "Ethan, you don't owe me anything. Not food. Not rent. Not gratitude. The only thing I ask is that you keep showing up for yourself. That you keep fighting, keep learning. That's all." Ethan's chest heaved. He wanted to argue, but the words stuck. He collapsed onto the bed, burying his face in his hands. For a long time, Mr. Carter simply sat in the doorway, giving him space. Finally, he said softly, "You're not alone anymore. Let that be enough." That night, Ethan pulled the photograph of his mother from his backpack. He traced the edges with his thumb, tears glistening in his eyes. "I thought keeping my promise meant doing it all alone," he whispered. "But maybe it means accepting help too. Maybe it means letting people in." He slipped the photo back into the bag, lying down under warm sheets. And for the first time, he felt not just safe, but hopeful. Ethan had begun to taste what normal life felt like. Warm meals, quiet nights, steady mornings. Yet stability, he soon learned, was fragile, like glass that could shatter with the smallest crack. At school, the whispers hadn't died down. If anything, they grew louder. Mr. Carter's favorite, someone hissed when he walked past. "Bet he's just using him for attention," another sneered. Or maybe Ethan begged. Maybe that's how he got in. Every word was a blade. Ethan clenched his jaw, his pride screaming not to flinch, but the cuts went deep. And then came the test. It happened on a Monday morning. The principal stepped into Ethan's classroom, smiling broadly. "We have exciting news," she said. "This year, one student from our district will be nominated for the National Scholars Program, a scholarship that covers college tuition in full." The room buzzed with excitement. A scholarship, freedom, opportunity, a future. The candidate must show exceptional grades, character, and perseverance, the principal continued. "And after much consideration, one of the top contenders from this school is," she paused for dramatic effect, "Ethan Hayes." Silence. Every head turned toward him. Dozens of eyes, wide with shock, disbelief, jealousy. And then the whispers began. "Ethan? The bridge boy? No way. He doesn't deserve it." Ethan's throat tightened. He wanted to vanish, to melt into the floor. Instead, he sat rigid, face blank, heart racing like a drum. The backlash came fast and merciless. By lunch, rumors spread like wildfire. Some said Mr. Carter had pulled strings. Others said Ethan had lied about his life to gain pity. In the hallway, one boy shoved him against a locker. "You think you're better than us, huh? Just because some teacher took you in." Ethan pushed him back, fists clenched, fury burning in his chest. But he didn't swing. Not yet. At home, he sat at his desk, staring at his books without reading. His mind replayed the whispers, the accusations, over and over. He wanted to scream. He wanted to run. He wanted to prove them wrong. But how? That night, Ethan told Mr. Carter about the nomination. The teacher smiled. "You deserve it." But Ethan shook his head bitterly. "No, they're right. It's not me. I don't deserve this. I'm just a kid who slept under a bridge. Mr. Carter leaned forward, eyes steady. "Exactly. And you're still here. Still fighting. Still learning. Oh, you know how many wouldn't have made it this far? That's what makes you different, Ethan. Not luck. Not pity. Strength." But the words didn't land. The doubts were louder. 2 weeks later, the final selection round was announced, a written exam, followed by a public presentation. Each candidate had to deliver a speech on resilience, explaining what it meant to them. When Ethan heard the word resilience, his stomach twisted. How could he tell his story without exposing everything? Without bearing the bridge, the hunger, the shame? Yet if he stayed silent, he'd lose his chance. The test wasn't just about knowledge. It was about truth. And truth was the one thing Ethan feared most. The pressure built until it nearly broke him. One night, after hours of failed attempts at writing his speech, Ethan slammed his notebook shut and stormed out of the house. He walked until he found himself back under the bridge, the place he had sworn never to return. He sat on the cold ground, staring at the graffiti-stained concrete. Memories crashed over him. Nights of shivering, mornings of hunger, the sound of his mother's voice echoing in the dark. His chest tightened. He whispered hoarsely, "I can't do this, Mom. I can't." Tears slipped down his cheeks. He hadn't cried like this in years. But then, something shifted. He pulled his mother's photograph from his backpack, the edges worn from years of clutching it. He studied her smile, the warmth in her eyes. Resilience. That's what she had given him. That's what had carried him through the nights under this very bridge. And suddenly, Ethan understood. His story wasn't something to hide. It was his strength. The very thing that made him worthy of standing on that stage. He rose to his feet, brushing the dirt from his clothes. His voice shook, but it was steady enough. "I'll tell them. All of it. No matter what they say." The day of the presentation arrived. The auditorium buzzed with students, parents, and teachers. When Ethan's name was called, he walked to the podium, every whisper, every doubt chasing him like shadows. He took a deep breath. Then he spoke. "My name is Ethan Hayes. And for years, resilience was the only thing I had. I know what it feels like to walk miles on an empty stomach, to study by streetlight, to sleep under a bridge with nothing but a promise to keep me alive." Gasps rippled through the audience. The whispers returned, sharp and shocked. But Ethan pressed on, voice rising. Resilience isn't about never falling. It's about rising again, even when the world tries to break you. It's about keeping a promise, even when everything inside you screams to give up. "And I am here because I did not give up." His final words rang through the auditorium like thunder. Silence followed. Then, slowly, applause. It swelled until it filled the room, louder and louder, drowning out the whispers. When Ethan stepped down from the stage, his hands were trembling. But for the first time, they weren't trembling from fear. They trembled from release. He had spoken his truth. He had owned it. Mr. Carter was waiting in the wings, pride shining in his eyes. That, he whispered, was resilience. Ethan's chest ached, but this time it wasn't from hunger. It was from something new, something powerful. Hope. The test was far from over. But for the first time, Ethan believed he might actually win. The auditorium still echoed in Ethan's memory. The applause, the gasps, the way his words had hung in the air like fire. But once the lights dimmed, reality returned, sharp and unforgiving. The whispers resumed almost immediately. Only now, they were sharper. He just used his sob story. Of course they clapped. Who wouldn't, after a speech like that? He's playing the victim. It stung. But for the first time, Ethan didn't flinch. His truth was out now. The world could twist it however they wanted. He had spoken for himself, and for his mother. Still, the results would decide everything. Days stretched painfully slow. Ethan threw himself into studying, into homework, into anything that distracted him from the gnawing anxiety. At night, though, doubt crept back. He lay awake staring at the ceiling, imagining every possible outcome. What if the judges thought he was pathetic? What if they believed the rumors that Mr. Carter had pulled strings? One night, unable to sleep, he whispered to his mother's photo, "If I don't win this, was it all for nothing?" The silence gave no answer. But deep inside, something steadier whispered back, "It's not about winning. It's about not giving up." The letter came on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Mr. Carter found it in the mailbox, hands trembling as he held the thick, white envelope. "Ethan," he called. The boy looked up from his homework, his heart dropping at the sight of the official seal. His hands shook as he tore it open, eyes scanning desperately. And there it was. "Congratulations. You have been awarded the National Scholars Program Scholarship." Ethan's breath caught. The words blurred as tears filled his eyes. He looked up at Mr. Carter, speechless. The teacher smiled softly. "You did it." But Ethan shook his head, voice breaking. "No, we did it." The school erupted with news of his victory. Some cheered, genuinely proud. But others couldn't stand it. At lunch, a boy muttered loudly, "Guess pity pays better than brains." Another added, "Enjoy the handouts, rich boy." Ethan ignored them, but the words still sliced deep. That evening, Mr. Carter tried to celebrate with a small dinner, roast chicken, candles, a cake from the bakery. But Ethan's appetite was gone. He pushed food around his plate, eyes shadowed. Finally, he whispered, "Why do they hate me for surviving?" Mr. Carter's voice was firm. "They don't hate you, Ethan. They hate what you represent. You remind them of what they could be if life were crueler. And they don't want to face that." The words lingered. Slowly, Ethan nodded. But the storm hadn't passed. 1 week later, someone posted on the school forum a photo of Ethan's old sleeping spot under the bridge. The caption read, "This is your scholarship hero." Homeless trash. Laughter flooded the comments. Cruel emojis. Twisted jokes. When Ethan saw it, his chest caved in. The bridge, the secret he had guarded for years, was now a weapon in the hands of strangers. He slammed his laptop shut, trembling with rage and humiliation. "They'll never see me as anything else," he muttered. Mr. Carter placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then prove them wrong. Not with words. With who you become." The next day, Ethan walked into school taller than before. The whispers followed him, the stares burned, but he didn't bow his head. In history class, a girl whispered, "That's the bridge boy." Ethan turned, meeting her eyes. "Yeah," he said calmly. "And I'm also the scholarship winner." The class went silent. For the first time, he owned his story, not as shame, but as strength. From that day on, things began to shift. Slowly, painfully. A few classmates who had mocked him before now approached quietly, curiosity replacing cruelty. "How did you study without books?" one asked. "Was it scary?" another whispered. Ethan answered honestly, never glorifying, never hiding. His scars became lessons. His pain became proof. Weeks turned into months. Ethan poured himself into schoolwork, into preparation for the future. His speech was shared online, spreading far beyond the auditorium. Strangers wrote messages of support. "You're an inspiration. You give me hope." For the first time, Ethan felt the weight of his story shifting, not a burden, but a torch. Something he carried not just for himself, but for others. And late one night, as he sat at his desk, he whispered to his mother's photo, "I kept the promise. I didn't just survive. I rose." Years had passed since Ethan Hayes had taken his first steps into Mr. Carter's home. The boy who once walked miles on empty stomachs, the boy who had slept under a bridge, was gone. In his place stood a young man, tall, steady, eyes sharp with focus, shoulders squared with confidence. Yet the memories of the bridge were never far. It was a gray afternoon when Ethan returned to the bridge. He hadn't been back in years. The city had changed, the graffiti was different, the piles of trash shifted, and the echoes of footsteps felt hollow without the sounds of his own struggle. He walked slowly, boots crunching on the gravel. The air smelled faintly of rain and concrete. Each step brought back a memory. The nights of shivering, the mornings of aching hunger, the long walks to school that had seemed endless. He stopped at the center of the bridge, staring at the dark concrete beneath him. Here, he had fought, had survived, had promised himself he would rise. Now he had. Ethan leaned against the railing, gazing at the river below. The water flowed relentlessly, unstoppable, much like time. He thought of his mother, her smile, the words she had whispered, "Fight. Never stop learning." The bridge had been cruel, but it had been a teacher too. Every mile walked, every blister endured, every tear shed had carved him into who he had become. He whispered softly, "I did it, Mom. I survived. I rose above it all." For the first time, he didn't just speak to her photograph. He felt her presence in every fiber of his being. Her pride, her love, her guidance, all alive within him. Ethan didn't linger long. The bridge was a reminder, but his life had moved forward. He had graduated with honors, received scholarships, and now worked with a program to help underprivileged kids. Kids like he had once been. Each day, he walked into classrooms, community centers, shelters, teaching, mentoring, showing them that survival was possible, that resilience was a choice, and that no bridge, no matter how dark, was the end of the road. He remembered the boy who had whispered in the dark, "I can't do this, Mom." Now, he was the answer to that whisper. Years had tempered him, but the scars remained, not as shame, but as trophies. He remembered the scholarship, the whispers at school, the betrayal, and the long nights of doubt. Every trial had forged his resilience. Every challenge had become a stepping stone. Standing on the bridge, he smiled faintly. This place had been a crucible, a proving ground, a symbol of struggle and survival. And now, it was a monument, not of suffering, but of triumph. He took a deep breath, feeling the cold wind on his face, the pulse of the city around him. I am not the boy I was, he thought. I am stronger, wiser, and I carry my past with me, not beneath me. As he left the bridge, Ethan's steps were steady, confident, purposeful. His backpack was light. No more hiding, no more hunger, no more running. And yet, he carried a new burden, a promise not to forget, not to hide, not to leave behind those still struggling. He thought of the children he now mentored, of the letters he had received from strangers inspired by his story, of the lives he might touch. Ethan had once walked alone. Now, he walked with purpose, and others followed. Not because he demanded it, but because his life had become proof that rising was possible, that hope was real, that survival could blossom into greatness. That night, he sat by his desk, looking at his mother's old photograph, now worn but cherished. "Mom," he whispered, voice steady, "your fight became my fight. Your promise became mine. And the boy under the bridge? He's still here, inside me, but he's stronger now. He's me, and I'll make sure no one ever feels invisible the way I did." Ethan's eyes glimmered with quiet triumph. The journey had been brutal, the nights had been long, the struggles nearly unbearable. But the victory, true victory, was more than scholarship, more than recognition. It was life lived fully, with courage, resilience, and purpose. And as he finally closed his eyes, a deep sense of peace settled over him. The bridge was no longer a place of despair, it was a place of legacy. Ethan Hayes became more than a survivor. He became a symbol, a reminder that even in the darkest nights, hope could shine, that even under the heaviest burdens, the human spirit could rise. He returned to that bridge not to relive pain, but to honor it, to remember how far he had come, and to light the way for others still finding their path. And in the quiet hum of the city, the whispers of the past became a chorus of triumph. He had walked, he had stumbled, he had fallen, but he had risen, and the world would never forget. Ethan's story wasn't just about survival, it was about rising, about proving that even in the darkest moments, hope can still win. If his journey touched you, show your support by liking this video. Share your thoughts and reflections in the comments. We read every one. And don't forget to subscribe, so you never miss the next story of resilience and courage.